Welcome to Becoming Church, the podcast where we discuss how the message and movement of Jesus is not just about becoming Christians, but about becoming the church. I'm your host, Kristin Mockler-Young, and I'm so glad you are joining the conversation. All right, friends, and welcome back to the podcast. Listen, I'm already laughing because I have an actual friend here today. It is Antwuan Malone. Antwuan, welcome to the show.
What's up? What's up? Hey, I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be in a conversation with Kristin. It's been several months since I've had the pleasure of chatting with Kristin, and so I am blessed just to hear your voice. Thank you so much for inviting me to the show. You are an amazing person. Love to follow you.
Oh gosh, well, thank you, man. Everybody needs to come on and start their interviews like that. That sounds incredible. No, it's perfect. Yeah, so Antwuan and I actually, a few months ago at the Mosaic National Conference, we co-hosted together, I guess, the online experience. I think we can call it that.
Yeah, we co-hosted together.
So and Marcus, he's going to be on the show too. Yeah, but we basically spent days together just doing essentially this. Yeah, you were out there talking to people on the streets. I was just trying to keep Marcus moving a little bit. He was in it though, man. Marcus Lloyd. You guys will get a chance to meet him if you haven't already. Soon. Yeah. He's great, guys. Again, I was in good company. I don't know that you guys needed me all that much. You guys were killing it. No, you're great. Listen, we were a great little trio and we had fun. That's what we're going to do today here too.
Yeah. We're
going to have some fun. All right. So you are on staff at a church, right?
That's correct. Yes. I am the young adult pastor at Bentry Bible Fellowship in Carrollton, Texas. I recently joined staff in December of 2022. And so it's a little bit of a new role. The role is new, but the ministry and my passion in ministry for young adults is not new. I've been doing that for close to 10 years. It's weird because with COVID, it's almost like you take a couple of years out, right? And so your brain doesn't hear. So it's probably 10 or 11 years, but it feels like 9 or 8. But been doing it for quite some time.
Okay, so young adult is a term that I think people throw around, okay? And so I'm looking at myself here in this Zoom screen, and my brain knows that I'm a grand millennial. Like, I'm not young, but I hear young adult and I'm still like, that's me. But our young adult.
Well, you are welcome to join us at any time. And by the way, I don't fit into the qualifier, but this is the question. Like, what is a young adult is the question that's most often asked and most often gotten wrong, in my opinion. At least that's the way I talk about it. Because a lot of people, what will happen is sometimes people who are younger, let's say 18 to 24 or college aged, when they hear young adult, many of them think, oh, I'm not quite an adult yet. So they're thinking young professional, older. 25 to 35. And then there's other people, and I've gotten emails from both sides of this spectrum in the role that I'm in now, that say, oh, young adult is the college age people. I'm not that. And so I'm something else. And so I have to make videos and FAQ things, but let me offer my definition. Young adult is the axis of is time and life stages. And so everything in between graduating high school and young family, to me, fits in that space of young adult. Mm-hmm. And as long as you add to it the age range of 18 to 35-ish, around 35.
Oh, okay.
So if you say 18 to 35-ish is an age category, and in the life stage that's in between graduating high school and young family. So that includes single, that includes, I like to say nearly married or dating or engaged, newly married, and it's pretty much married without children. And then once children show up, then you are out of my purview because the church does such a great job of focusing on young families. Most churches, that's the primary demographic for their ministry strategies. And so we really don't need to duplicate effort there. People are being served well in that space. So that's how I like to categorize young adult, 18-35, graduated high school to young family.
Antwuan, that is a range.
That
like 18 to 30. Listen, when I teach, I'm teaching to adults. Like I know I've got men and women and we've got a variety of ages, but I know I'm speaking to adults. Like an 18-year-old, I'm not sure their brain is fully functioned yet.
That it isn't, but
now maybe the 35-year-olds too. I don't know.
Well, I tell you what, if you want to go get stuff done, a lot of times you need to, like with energy, a lot of times you need to do that with that 18 to 24. I like to say 18 to 24 is, again, these are categories. And so not everyone fits into these categories, but 18 to 24 is typically trying to find a way to spend energy. Once you turn 25 and you go up, in many ways, you're trying to figure out how to conserve or replenish energy. So it's the difference between volleyball 18 to 24 and a coffee jazz night happy hour for the young professional. And it's actually a pretty interesting ministry strategy dynamic as you think about your calendars. So when you think about the time of the calendar and you also think about the demographic, what kind of events are you doing? Do they give people energy? Do they require more energy? And sometimes that can help you with some of those younger ages or older ages. But yeah, that's one of many distinctions.
Okay.
But it's but it does cover that is a wide range and multiple life stages in between those ranges. And we like to say multiple starting points. So you're moving from graduating high school to the post-high school era. You're moving from college era to professional era. You're moving from single era to married era. Possibly. And so all those create rites of passage or starting points that we can help people bring the gospel into. So that's kind of what we do.
I think as every generation changes, right? Just as every generation changes, I think that young adults often are one of the most misunderstood groups of people, especially that like 18 to 24 range, maybe even high schoolers, maybe even a little bit, that's a loose age bracket there. What is a misconception that you think people have about this current generation of young adults?
Well, so I'll answer the question for Gen Z and for elder millennials, I think, or maybe it should be younger millennials. But so you say generation, but it's a little bit of both of those.
Sure.
I think one of the misconceptions is that a big one is that they have a lot of time, and that's regardless. That's just young adults don't have as much time as you think they do. And it's interesting to talk about it this way because I was talking with my daughter the other day and I was explaining this, and
she's how old?
My daughter's 17, right?
Okay.
And so I was talking to her and I was like, okay, imagine going through life and you're learning how to juggle, right? And so when you're in high school, you're learning how to juggle 3 things, right? 3 balls. And those balls for this metaphor is like school, work, and cheerleading.
Friends, relationship. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever your 3 or 4 things are. And then you're figuring out how to do that. Stuff is dropping, but you finally figure out you get a rhythm. And then you graduate and someone throws in another ball. And so you got to learn how to reorient yourself and kind of learn to juggle another thing. And so you're doing that. And then someone throws in like a bowling ball, which is a whole different kind of thing. And okay, so after the juggling, time is like this. And so when you get older, you got family, you got career, you got kids, you're juggling like 7 balls, a couple bowling balls, some bowling pins, and you're looking at the young adult who's juggling 3, 4, 5 things. And you're like, you should be able to carry more. What you're missing is that the young adult is just now learning how to juggle 5 or 6 things.
Yeah.
And for them, they're in high tension mode because they're adjusting to that. And so they really don't have time to add more things. They're learning how to do this. And so it looks like they have more time because of how we manage our time and our energy. But a lot of the young adults, they don't feel like they have that extra time to do that. And so I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. If I can get another one, another big misconception is, I think, especially with Christian young adults, how they want to interface with the world. My philosophy is that boomers kind of look at the world through a fundamental question. So for them, I think the fundamental question is many questions, but the fundamental question was, what's going to happen when you die? And so everything that they were doing was really focused on how do you deal with with what's going to happen when you die. You saw that with the Billy Graham movement, a lot of the gospel and the evangelistic movements that we saw from the boomers, lots of really, really great fruit from that focal first conversation. But when you get to millennials, we're just going to skip Gen X because nobody talks about Gen X. But when you get to millennials aren't asking that as their fundamental question. Their fundamental question, in my opinion, is, do you love me anyway? And it's not so much about the soteriological conversation about what happens when we die. They want to know, what are you going to do? Do you love me now? And the key word in that is anyway. And that's a fundamental change of the conversation, right? And so when boomers are talking to millennials, they're wanting to talk about the high spiritual, soteriological, that level of thing. But the millennials they see that and they see value there, but their primary question is, do you love me anyway? It's the difference between John 3 with Nicodemus and Jesus's conversation with Nicodemus, which is really, mental and intellectual and spiritual. And then you jump over to John 4 and the woman at the well, he's saying, there's a connection thing here, and you've had 5 husbands. And Jesus interfaces with those two conversations differently, still moves them toward the spirit, but interfaces with them differently because he understands his audience. And I think the two generations miss each other because they're trying to have a Nicodemus conversations with women at the well, and they're wondering why they're not sticking with it. And so it creates a disconnect, a fundamental disconnect, which can lead to distrust, which I think we see a lot of. And then Gen Z, their fundamental question, in my opinion, is, does it work? And so for them, it's a hyper practical. They've seen everything not work well. And so I think Gen Z is neutralized almost everything, and all institutions and ideas are up for defending themselves. Nothing has benefit of the doubt. And so that includes Christianity and the Bible. And their fundamental question is, but does it actually work? Can I trust it? And I think understanding the different conversations can get around misassigning motives to those generations.
That's a really, really valid point, that every generation is asking a different question and looking for a different thing. And I think too, that's why you said for to skip Gen X. I think that's why a lot of parents right now, though, because they are caught between boomers and millennials. And so they're like, all right, generation. I was raised to believe this, right? And so I was parented in a way of, I'm broad brush here, but like, I think a lot of current parents of young kids are like, well, I was parented to always think eternal and heaven and hell and whatever. And then, yes, they're trying to talk to these millennials who say, but what about this life? And what about me now? And when you think it's a change, right?
Yeah. Like all the cultural conversations that are being had are really questions around, do you love me anyway? Or say it differently, can I disqualify myself from your love? So if I'm Black, or does my race disqualify me from you loving me? Does my gender disqualify you from loving me like Jesus? Does my lifestyle, my life choices do that? Does my social economic status, does my sickness, does my burden on you cause you to not like? So almost all the cultural conversations leading into the political conversations are questions about value, which is what's important to millennials and Gen Z. But millennials particularly brought, hey, do you value me? Am I somebody who you want to build into, who you're willing to spend? And the generation before us misunderstood the importance of that question to that generation. And started to say, oh, you guys are just too feely, you're too emotional, right? And they started to disparage that starting point for the conversation because it wasn't hyper theologically academic, et cetera, in this other space. And it was more, how do we love people? How do we connect with people? Where's the community? We love Jesus because of how he impacted people as he walked the earth. You love Jesus because of the impact he had on people after he left the earth. And the gospel makes space for all of that. So it's beautiful. The gospel can be part of all those conversations, but understanding the context is so important in our ministries and understanding.
I'm even sitting here thinking, Antwuan, I'm like, I remember growing up and everything was about God, right? God, because it was all future. It was all after we die. It was all God. And I feel like lately, I didn't even realize this till we were sitting here having this conversation. I feel like now or lately it's been a lot more Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And yes, they're essentially the same.
Yes.
But I wonder if that's why. I wonder if that's been the language shift, because instead of thinking and focusing on this God who will one day and is far off and, we choose to believe in, we have been focusing more on a Jesus who is God with us, but a Jesus who understands us in our present now.
Yeah.
And that's something that this generation can relate more to.
I think so. There's a idea that I have about the term amazing grace, which kind of encapsulates this conversation. So the writer of Amazing Grace is living in a time period where everything that you got was at the work of your hands. Like you had a farm, you had to get up early, you worked from the morning to night, and it took effort and sweat. You didn't get hardly anything unless you worked for it, unless you went and got it. And then someone told you and said, hey, the best thing you could ever want is going to be given to you for free, right? And so if you're living in a world where everything costs you energy, time, effort, and someone says the best thing is free, that is indeed amazing. And so grace is amazing. And it's no wonder that you sit on that as a psychological generational profile. But then you come forward to an environment where there's a lot of convenience, fast food, lots of people. It's not aberrational or extraordinary for someone to do something that you benefit from that you didn't earn. And so grace from the standpoint of someone's going to do something for me feels less amazing, if you will, to a generation where that is a normal occurrence. What doesn't feel normal and ordinary is the sacrificial nature of living for someone else and being a part of providing that grace to others. That still feels, since you're in an environment where you're used to receiving grace, being a part of giving grace and providing grace and love for other people now becomes the amazing thing. And so it's not just amazing grace now. It's still amazing grace, but it's amazing grace not from the work done to me, but the work done through me to others. And I believe that the millennial generation, as well as I would say even the Gen X, and even some of the alpha that's coming along, I think they're more on that space because grace feels less amazing. And I know it feels like sacrilegious to say.
No, you just blew my mind.
But
no, that's not. I don't think it's sacrilegious at all. I think it's brilliant to be able to go, hey, let's look at things from a different perspective and understand, instead of just getting mad and the youths that are wilding out or don't get it or whatever. No, let's understand and ask the question, why don't they get it? And that's exactly what you did, Antwuan. That was beautiful. That was lovely. That's so great.
It's been really helpful for my dealing with people and it creating orientation. It's not like missions. You go to another country and you understand what's going on in that country, find the redemptive analogies, and you speak the gospel to them in their context. Like I say, ministry is a context sport, and you go and you context how do they see the world? What are their challenges? What do they want to achieve? Where does the gospel intersect that? And allowing the Spirit to really speak into that, and not assuming that your experience is their experience, and that the things that drew you are going to draw them. And that's the work that I think we can continue to do better and better through multiple generational ministry.
Yeah, well, even when I taught kindergarten, there was always like the set way, like this is how you teach kids how to read. And then I was lucky to be teaching in a time where we realized that we had to actually differentiate, because not every kid could learn to read the same way because everybody's brain doesn't work the same way. And I think when we think about it in that context, it's easier to go, no, it's not that they don't get it or that they're wrong. How are we going to teach Jesus to people in a way that they will understand? Maybe it's not how we learned it, but that doesn't actually matter. It's not the method. It's not, but how can we explain it in a way that they will get?
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful.
Isn't that what Paul says? He's like, to the weak, I became weak, to the strong, I became strong. To the Jew, I became the Jew. Like he says, I do all this so that I might win. I become all things to all people so that I might win some. And that is that's not a compromise. That's just taking a second to think about, is this Nicodemus I'm talking to here, or is it the woman at the
Yeah.
well? Oh, Nicodemus has got this whole rich legacy about the law, and I'm gonna throw a few riddles at him. The woman at the well, oh wait, she's had all these husbands and she's looking for connection. Let me explain to her that the thing that she's looking for is fulfilled in the very same thing I offer Nicodemus, right? The same spirit, right? They both
Yeah.
get the spirit as the answer to the quandary, but the conversation shifts based on who he's talking to, and when that happens, amazing things happen.
Yeah. It's loving to think of the person first before we come at
Absolutely.
them with our information. All
Absolutely.
right. So you posted a video, something to the effect of like 1 million young adults are leaving the church every year. Why is that? What are you seeing and hearing from them, on why they're leaving, why they're exiting?
Well, one of the most interesting, yeah. So if you think about the numbers for that, it's about 2,740 a day, right? So you by the
A
end of the
day.
a day, like you
Man,
2,740 times
numbers are big.
365, that's almost a million. Yeah. So you think
Okay.
by the end of this day, if the numbers are tracking this way, over 2,000 people may have decided they no longer want to be a part of a church family, maybe even the faith altogether.
Yeah.
I think that's a big question that requires a lot of interrogation. I would say one of the most surprising things about that statistic is the nuns, which is a
Mhm.
category of people who have decided that they don't affiliate with any religious, they don't have any religious affiliation.
Just None, none, not
Yes, yeah, yeah, not
NUN,
that,
not
yeah,
the
not
ladies from
the,
The Sound of Music.
not,
Yes.
n-
Okay.
not, not Whoopi Goldberg in them, but
Yeah.
that's Sister Act. Oh man, I'm gonna go and watch Sister Act now. You got me on it. So, but anyway, but no. But what's interesting is that group of people are mostly made up of people who are hyperactive in the church. So a lot of people, the misconception on that is that, oh, these are people who they weren't really part of us anyway. But when you go and you look at the nuns, almost all of them were leaders, people who went on mission trips, people who volunteered regularly, and somewhere along their journey, they got disenchanted with church or church life for a series of reasons, and they left. So the nuns are not the people who are on the edges of our Christian community. The nuns are the people who are closest to the inner circles of our community, especially the young
Mm.
adults, which asks us to, which sort of begs the question: what in the world is happening
Yeah.
at a national level that has caused people who would normally give high levels of sacrifice of their energy, time, and money to decide that this is no longer something for them? And I would say one of the reasons that, in a nutshell, is the witness of the church has just faded, and young adults, most young adults in any generation at any time throughout history, almost everybody, you want to make the world a better place fundamentally. You want to fix something. You generally look at the generation before you, they've done something that you didn't like, and you want to fix that. You want to make the
Yeah.
world better, fundamentally, Christian or non-Christian. And you're looking for the things that are going to help you make the world better. And when it comes to Christian young adults, at the end of the day, is the gospel something that actually makes the world a better place? Does it allow me to love people well? Can I love people better? Can I grow in my love for people? I mean, as believers, the boundaries of our love for people should only be increasing day to day, right? I don't know that there's no boundary to it. We should be challenging ourselves. How do I love more like Jesus today? How do I love more like Jesus tomorrow?
Yeah.
Next year, my love should be more than it was this year. And the love should be getting wider, not getting smaller. And I
Okay.
think that the generation is looking at the church and saying, I'm not sure the love is getting wider. I see us getting more exclusive. I see us picking who we love and know who we don't love. I see us demonizing people instead of
Yeah.
fighting principalities. And regardless of whether you agree or disagree with their assertions, it's a wide level perspective. I'll say this: a lot of people say, yeah, but they're sensitive, or they're casting that they're saying that the church is the problem when they just ran into one or two really bad Christians. I would say two things to that. Number one, it's not one or two Christians. More
Tell
than
them.
likely, this is the product of several. Remember, again, these are highly invested people. So by the time they left the church, they go into a season of dystopia and sort of identity crisis, that's not something that they would choose for themselves naturally. It isn't a happy journey to leave the church. It is
right, especially if you've been highly committed.
That's right. It's an identity crisis. Yeah, it's like, okay, I did 70 interviews with people across the country about why they might leave the church. And many of the persons in those interviews were people who were on their way to seminary and on their way, they saw themselves as missionaries or doctors, ministers, potential pastors. And when they decided to change their direction, they didn't know what they were going to do with their life, because their whole life they figured would be ministry to church, 25 all the way up to mid-30s with that. It's not an easy choice that people are making. And so we shouldn't trivialize those choices. Right. The second thing I would say to all of that, this concept of why they're leaving, is that Jesus told us that this is the case. We don't get to say, oh, well, some Christians did that to them, and so it wasn't us and it's their problem. Jesus said, people are going to have a problem with me and the things that I'm doing if you don't love one another. That's what Jesus said. He didn't say each individual will call out each individual and you can only deal with the person who's in front of you. And no. He says the world is watching how Christians generally are treating other Christians generally, and my name and message and reputation and kingdom ethic and acceptance that is on the line when they watch Christians mistreat other Christians. Yeah. That's not someone who's being sensitive. Jesus foretold that. So you don't have to like that. Those of you who want to exonerate yourself from this conversation because you feel like you weren't part of the problem. But Jesus says it doesn't matter whether you were the infraction or not. If people see Christians misbehave, just like he says, if you let your light so shine before men, they'll see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. It works both ways. And we haven't protected our witness enough. We've been driven by fear, and there's a whole nother conversation. But I do think that's the major reason why.
Get in there. Get in there. We're gonna talk to the people who think that they're not part of the problem, which I'm sure is not our listeners at all. It's not you guys, but maybe you share this with somebody.
Well, I'm sure I'm part of the problem in some way. Yeah, I'm always checking myself as well with this thing. Yeah.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like, what do we do?
Yeah, well, the policy's gotten away, I think. Yeah. I think as everyone started to feel more uncertainty about the future, we retreated to our old survivalist selves. And in the survivalist game, the winners are the powerful and the rich and the control and the popular and those who have the social currencies that keep them from being eaten in the sort of civilized jungle of our society. That's the and the church decided to grab that playbook and use politics for power, use economy for money, and we chose to protect ourselves because we forgot that God has given us eternal life, and we thought maybe we needed to go find it again and get it with our power and our other stuff. The Christian is able to sacrifice life, money, power, because life is already been given to them. Yeah. It's the reason why Jesus could give his life away. People say, well, Jesus gave life. I've heard this. Jesus gave his life away. He knew he was going to raise from the dead. Well, good. You too are going to raise from the dead. God's going to raise you after this life. And so you too can pick up your cross and follow. If that's a great way, if that's what he was able to do, his perspective was such that, okay, I have eternal life. I don't have to fight for survival. So now, God, whatever you want to do with my life, that's going to be on mission for you and do what is good, do that. I'm willing to sacrifice. I'm willing to be a part of that purpose. We didn't do that. Once we were offered some opportunity to sacrifice, we chose survival, not sacrifice. And I think the world watched a Jesus people put down a cross instead of pick up a cross. And they said, that doesn't look like Jesus.
Yeah. And it's fear. It's weird when things are uncertain, when they're out of our control. I think it's fear that pushes us to, survivalist methods and all of these things. And like you said, that was a really great point that, like, if we already know that we're going to be resurrected again, then we don't need to live with that fear. And whatever the thing is that's holding us back and keeping us from living like Jesus fully, that's now our master. That's now the thing that we're worshiping. If we are choosing to be afraid of that instead of going, hey, I already know how this story ends.
That's right. The lie of the enemy is that death is the end. Jesus says death, physical death is not the end. What does it mean to say you defeated death? It's more than poetry. It's you no longer have to fight. You don't have to spend your gifts for your own personal survival. And what is it? It looks like so many things to be in that survival mode. And man, we just have, I feel like there's a good bit of people who are still working. Like, it's not everyone, but the loudest voices are the voices who are still playing the power games and the money games and the fame games. And they're doing it, they're trying to baptize it. They're baptizing it in Jesus, trying to say that it's a holy thing, a holy war, or some sort of sanctimony, when in reality it is you're leveraging Christ for power and for for social and earthly survival. And listen, I know that concept is like very abstract and very difficult for me to get my head around as I think through it, right? What does it really mean to live that way? But I think Jesus invites us into that very challenge. I think that's a part of what it means to become more and more like Jesus every day, is to live more and more into the reality that my life is yours, God, to do with what you will at any given moment. And I'm looking for opportunities to give myself away for other people. If we're going to play a game, Paul says, outdo one another in honor, right? If we're going to play a game, if we're going to compete, right? If we're going to compete, let's figure out how we can honor each other the best. Who's going to be the first? Who's going to be the best at honoring other people and building into the value of other people? That's the sort of thing that Romans 12 pulls us into. It's not something that we often do. One last picture is Romans 12. He says, be a living sacrifice. It's kind of a lamb. The picture is like this lamb that's been bloody, that gets off the altar and goes home and then comes back the next day to be sacrificed again. And the idea is that you're a living sacrifice, not a one-time sacrifice, but a life of sacrifice, a ongoing, repeated giving of oneself away for the other. And he says, once you do that by being transformed by the renewing of your mind, moved from that survivalist mindset into this sacrificial and sanctified mindset, then you can know the will of God, his good and perfect will, right? And that's when you get invited into what God is really doing with you and your life and the influence that you have. So I think a lot of people are looking for that. And those people who are closer to the church are looking to see that in the church. They didn't see that. And I think it caused the wires to burn a little bit in the inside.
Yeah, well, even thinking about the things that the different generations are looking for, Antwuan, you are very intentional in racial reconciliation and having conversations as well. And I do think that this is something that maybe this is a stereotype, maybe this is true. You can tell me. I would say it seems as though the younger generations care about this more than perhaps the older ones do. Is there a particular way that we can either engage young adults in race and justice conversations, or maybe on the flip side, learn from them as far as how to better do this?
Yeah, I agree. I think because of the reasons I gave you, because of the pragmatism of Gen Z and the love question, the value question that millennials are driven by, I think they're more inclined to pursue those sort of, if you will, justice, those caring for other people well kind of deals. I think we could humble ourselves, older generations. I think we can humble ourselves a little bit and invite them into our spaces. And I think there's a lot of space to learn from them, and not in a patronizing kind of way. Like sometimes I hear that from stages, and I don't believe the person that said that, because I believe that person would invite persons in, hear them out, and then pat them on the head and say, "You're such a great little thinker." It's like asking your child to come in the room and help you with the budget, and she might have some really great ideas. It may even surprise you with a little profundity, but you're not at all going to take that advice. You're just going to do what you do. And inviting people in is not that. I'm not saying you just come in to make a cute show and be clever. We're saying, no, there's some blind spots that we have about how to love people well, right? I keep coming back to this love thing about how to love people well. And there's
It's okay.
something
Jesus
about what
did too. It's all right.
he kept coming back to it. Yeah. But there's something about how you want to love people that is different than our instincts. Teach us about that. Where can we help you with that? What have you seen as missed that has been missed? And you hope that both parties come with that kind of humility, because the boomer generation and Gen X generations have a lot to offer as well. The other thing I would say is to stop for, this sounds really aggressive. I'm just going to say it as an imperative.
Come on.
Stop acting like millennials are all that much different than you. Let's just do a quick little check for boomers. I say this to them all the time. Millennials actually hate when I say this too, because I'm like, hey, you're on track to be a boomer. And I know you don't like that. But boomers, if you think about it, when they were 20, right? Okay. That's probably in the 60s and 70s. What was going on, right? Race conversations, women's rights, racial rights. You had drugs, you had sex, you had rainbows, you had protests, you had activism, you had the want for freedom, right? You had political turmoil. The boomers were the first millennials. They're the original millennial. Like, when you really think about it, if you put Twitter and you put TikTok and all those things in the 60s and 70s with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and the Black Panthers and the suffrage movement and all that, it doesn't look that much different than right now.
It still works.
That generation was protesters. It's a whole generation of protesters, a whole generation of people who couldn't trust the institutions that were around them, because the institutions had locked into things that were antiquated. And so take a second, take a deep breath, and remember that you're actually not that different than millennials. Remember what that was like, and look to form a connection instead of pushing people away. It turns out there's a pretty interesting mirror image between the 20-year-old millennial and the 20-year-old boomer.
Why do you think that some boomers don't see that? Do you think that maybe they see it, but they think that the millennial is on the wrong side? Like they're giving the wrong answer? Like, why do you think this is hard to see?
I don't know. I think when we get older, I don't have a great answer. But what I want to say is when you get older, you look back and you're like, as you leave one era, you just kind of, you outgrow it, or you decide that you're a different person. You grow into something else. That's why I say millennials. I wouldn't be surprised at all if millennials take a similar approach to whatever follows Gen Alpha. I guess it's Gen Beta. I don't know if Beta is a word now. Beta's bad, I'm sure, in some of our social conversations. Nobody wants to be a beta, right? But whatever follows Alpha, like, it's potentially true that millennials are going to look at that generation and be like, man, they don't know what they're doing. And they're naive, they're this, right? And getting older can produce that kind of dissonance. And I also think that the older you get, the less filters you have. And so you get less filters and you're less likely to change your mind. So you say whatever you want to say, and you think less about how it affects people, and you're not open to changing your mind. And that could create some really difficult conversations and self-realization and self-reflection that some people just seem to outlive. I hope I never do that. I don't want to be one of those persons that is not always self-reflecting in some way.
Yeah, I think the idea of constantly learning by constantly listening, and like you just said, always having an open mind to other perspectives is going to be the key, no matter your age.
Yeah.
All right. So going back to the nuns, what should churches and pastors do in order to better reach them or to effectively bring them back?
I think challenging sermons. Okay. Well, okay. So 18 to 30, it's a little bit different with age. This is where age makes a little bit of a difference here.
Sure.
So 18 to 24, you're in a situation where you're trying to figure out life, and you really kind of want to be challenged. When you think about college and anything post-college, like one of the things that really make them formative is you join a sorority, you join a family that you choose, right? And you join, and there's usually a father figure somewhere, or a mother figure somewhere that is helping you grow, a teacher that you really connect to, a coach who comes in, and those persons challenge you. they challenge you from the space of saying, we care about you and we want you to be a better you, and you receive that as value. And the church has either ignored that group in a lot of ways as far as what they need. They decided to leverage the group for their individual purposes instead of deciding to grow that group, be part of their discipleship in really intentional and personal ways. And so they either ignored or um, they decided to be light. They threw volleyball and pizza at them instead of challenging them into growth, into and setting a very and setting a clear goal and expectation that I'm going to walk with you and that we're going to grow together. So in some ways, it's listening and recognizing those persons. When you do that, you're going to get a set of things. It's like, man, we need to minister to these people in these ways. And most churches don't have a strategy at all for young adult ministry. And that's because it's very difficult. There's not a lot of books and a lot of resources for that. But I would say, hey, don't just haphazardly jump into young adult ministry. Do your research, understand again, it's just context. These are the things they taught us in seminary. It's not that different. It's just a mission field. Do what you would do at a mission field. Figure out what the lay of the land looks like. Where can you intersect that? What needs need to be addressed? Where does the gospel intersect with their needs? Come up with a strategy and begin to invite people into that strategy and mission and vision. Give people things to do, give things to be a part of, and don't throw your crumbs or your pizza or your volleyball at them. And just try to pacify young adults into their next phase of life. Average age of I gave you the range of young married with children as the end of young adult phase. That used to be around 27 on average. Right. So you would say young adults are 18 to 27, which is a big range. Sure. Now that range is 18 to like 31. Average age of having kids is 31. So if your mentality toward young adults is we're just going to pacify them until they become a young family, well, multiple trends are not in your favor. One, marriage or family happens later. 31, that's 12 years. Two, marriage is happening later. Three, a lot of parents don't want kids because it's so expensive to have kids. So they're choosing pets instead of children. And because it's so expensive right now. And so if you're waiting for the young family to show up, you're probably going to be waiting for a long time. It's time for you to think about directly ministering to young adults in your main services, as well as potentially a young adult ministry focused area inside of your church, if that makes sense. So I'll just say act with some intention around that stuff.
Yeah, that's good. All right. So the last question kind of piggybacks off of that, but goes more practical for the listener. So you just gave us a lot of ways, things that churches and pastors and staffers and leaders can do, right? For the person that's listening that might go, well, I don't know any young adults and I don't have any young adults in my life. What can they do practically? What is a simple step? What's the thing that they can do to become the church to those people that are actually around them?
Well, there are some ways to interface with where young adults are. It's important to not walk into this with a project kind of mentality, but
very good point.
But building a proximity, getting the biggest hurdle to what you just described is I don't have young adults around me. Well, how does that change? Or do you expect them to show up in your world, or will you have to find yourself somehow in theirs? And so I think looking for that is important. I think mentorship is an important thing. I think asking high school pastors, and if you're at a church, a student pastor or a high school pastor, hey, is there somebody I would like to be a mentor, is what you might show up if you're interested in something like that. And you say, hey, I would love to sit down with a couple of people. Is there somebody who you know of that's going to be in this area that might be able to help what I'm doing, or that I might be able to help with a mentorship? And you could start that with very practical stuff. Young business people are looking for business mentors, and so you start there, but bring the scriptures into that, bring the gospel into that, or whatever the mentorship may be. But I like the idea of centering the mentorship around life skills and bringing the gospel to that life skill. The life skill is the first connection point.
Yeah.
And so that's something I think you could do, again, working with that student pastor. There's student pastors in your church who know the students that are still here. They're probably still showing up in the high school ministry because they have nowhere else to go. And so, so they kind of show up. And so, asking where you can be of help, showing up in certain types of ways, and consistently working on your heart to say, I'm going to see these young people as image bearers of God, for whom God has created with specific purpose, and that would be a blessing to me and to others. Scripture says that all parts of the body are indispensable. That includes young adults. Young adults are an indispensable part of the body. So if you can start to think about it that way, then that means they've got something for you. There's a blessing that from God waiting for you with them. So go with that mindset and interface with them, not with a power dynamic, but with their interest of growing and walking alongside them.
Yeah.
And I think you might be able to connect with one or two. Adults.
I mean, and it's relationship. I think the idea of mentorship maybe even could scare somebody, but it doesn't have to be that hard. Like, food. Like, you invite somebody into your house. There are plenty of young adults at our church. And I guarantee you, if I called up any of them and were like, hey, do you want to come have dinner? I'm not throwing you my pizza, but do you want to come into my house with my family and have dinner with us? Yeah. They're coming.
Yeah. Host some game night, host things like you're saying, host game nights, host summer get-togethers. If you got a fancy house and you can play movies, host that, bring people together. But like you're saying, you're not throwing pizza at them. What you're doing is, the goal is for them to feel seen and cared for, and
invite them into your life.
Into your life. Yeah. So those are some practical stuff. There's a lot of other practical stuff that could be the product of a whole ministry strategy. Sure. But for an individual person, though, I think you're looking for ways to get proximity, which is what we're describing.
Yeah.
You're looking for a way to bring these people into your world so that you can learn more about them and how you can help them, and so that you can be helped by them. Again, they are a blessing to you as much as you're a blessing to them.
Absolutely.
Your time on earth doesn't add to your blessing quotient. God's going to do through them and through you the same thing. Each person gets to bless the other. So you can kill the power.
I love that. Antwuan, thank you so much for being here. It was great to
thanks
chat
for having
with you.
Me. I love it, man. Good luck with with growing the podcast. I think you're an amazing communicator and fun personality, and I can't wait for the rest of the world to meet you. So I'm hoping that God will open up those doors. This is going to be a fun journey to be a part of with you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Listen, guys, Antwuan just said, share with the world. We need the world to have the podcast. So just share the episode. Maybe even with the boomers that you know.
Yeah. Bring them in. They may be mad at me, but no, they won't be mad at me. That I think.
No, it'll be good. Antwuan is such a fun guy to talk to. Listen, if you're a pastor and you want more information and you want to reach the young adults in your community or the nuns, he also does some consulting work. So scroll down into the show notes and make sure that you reach out to Antwuan. Also, if this episode was shared with you, there's a very, very important thing that I want you to know, and that is this. You need to subscribe to this podcast. Typically, we only put episodes out once every other Sunday. However, my next guest had so much to say that I'm actually going to split it up into 2 different episodes, and you will get part 1 and part 2 in the next 2 weeks. So make sure that you don't miss that. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next time.